Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. And we're going to start things out with AMD. There are several pieces of AMD news, but the first of which we'll be tackling is AMD's Threadripper 3000, because another benchmark has appeared on the internet, but also a few hints regarding the platform itself, and these leaks are actually from Asus. But let's have a quick catch up of where we are now. So a couple of weeks ago, so you can skip forward a couple of minutes in the video if you don't require a catch up, but a couple of weeks ago on the USBIF website, there was an update for the AMD 2019 Premium chipset. Originally it simply was X570 that was listed, which of course is the AM4 platform, but more recently it was updated with TRX40, TRX80, and finally WRX80. And this was followed up a couple of days later with another leak which appeared on a Chinese forum, and a pretty well-known leaker said that according to their sources, AMD were working on at least 2 potential platforms for Threadripper. The first platform is going to launch this year, and it's going to be marketed and designed to basically replace X399 as we know and love it. Basically speaking, this means that it's going to be marketing towards content professionals, people who maybe do some light VM work and that type of thing. But there would also be a Pro solution, and this would launch next year, but it would be more feature-packed, have better I/O, and potentially more CPU cores. There is actually a question of whether the, I'm going to call it lower end, although I hesitate to call any version of Threadripper low end, but let's just say the TRX40 version may only go up to 32 cores rather than 64 cores. So as for TRX40 and 80, those are the two things easiest to tackle first. Well, potentially it's just lower I/O and also cut memory channels, so 4 memory channels versus 8 memory channels of TRX80. Now, an update to this has popped up because videocards.com have been speaking to a source at Asus, and according to this source, Asus are working on 2 motherboards. The first is Asus Prime TRX40 Pro, and the second is Asus ROG Strix TRX40-E Gaming. So this at the very least confirms that there are TRX40 motherboards coming, and therefore the chipset listing here isn't just in vain or an error or, whatever, that a board which is known as TRX40 exists. It is an actual product, so we can almost certainly say that TRX80 is also its own product, which leads us to several questions. What differences are there between those two? As I said, I personally think we're going to see different I/O and potentially memory channels as well. So what about WRX80? Well, originally I thought that the TRX80 may be the workstation and the WRX80 may be something related to Epic. However, there have also been a couple of rumours that AMD are also working on a workstation platform which is different to the TRX80. Unfortunately, no one knows this for certain, so I'm not going to tell you that this is accurate. This is pure guesswork on my part. But if it's true, then what we could have is the TRX40, which would have, let's just make this simple and say 4 memory channels and fewer PCIe lanes. TRX80, which would, let's say, have 8 memory channels, so very much like the full-fledged ROM, and maybe also support 64 CPU cores rather than only 32. And as for WRX80, maybe it would be super similar to a dual ROM server motherboard, dual socket, but maybe with a few concessions. I think one of the things is that the quality of the silicon itself may be a little lower, because otherwise they're going to be charging so much for a CPU. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think you're going to find this at $2.50. It's certainly not going to be in the realms of affordability for a lot of people, but it's certainly going to be cheaper than the pricing of, let's say, the $7,000-ish that AMD are charging for the 64-core 7702 and the 7742. You can add another 10% on top of that. So it's really expensive. That is, by the way, with the VAT included, just so we're clear. If the VAT isn't including there, it just comes under a shade under $7,000. And Epic's pricing is expensive, of course, but it's also kind of a bargain versus their competition. But still, $7,000 for a workstation platform processor may be a little much. So I'm guessing that they're going to go with lower quality silicon. Potentially, that's a guess. Obviously, it could not be. And maybe they will also do a few other things to disable features, just to make it so that there is some segmentation between it and Epic. Potentially, because obviously it's not going to be specifically designed for like server market. Maybe they will disable like error correction, or maybe they will disable the higher end security features of the workstation boards or something like that. And it's going to be really interesting to see what the prices are of those CPUs, as well as what the performance is going to be like. Obviously, for users who really need every last drop of power, it could be amazing. The other potential possibility is that we will only see two Threadripper platform, two separate platforms, TRX80 and TRX40, which was obviously the rumor that we'd heard with the source over in China, so that could be another potential as well. And now let's move over to the benchmark, which is on the user benchmark database, and I know it's not exactly the most scientifically accurate benchmark. However, when you're comparing like for like, so we're in this case going to be comparing the 32-core Threadripper 3000 processor versus the 2990WX, as well as just looking at the results themselves. I think that you can take the results with a little more seriousness. I'd like to thank viewer Martin for actually sending me the direct links to both of these results. So first things first, the 2990WX gets stomped, I can't actually put it any other way, by the engineering sample Threadripper CPU. Depending on the usage scenario, whether we're talking about 1 core, 2, 4, or 8, or 64 active threads, well, by golly gosh, it defeats the Threadripper 2990WX by anything from the low 20%, 23%, up to around 37%, so let's say 40%. Now, one thing we don't know yet is how far along this engineering sample is, so whether we're dealing with final clock frequencies, and also how much more is left in the tank. Even if this was final clock frequency, what more can you get out of it with overclocking? Obviously, Threadripper/AM4 doesn't generally lend itself to massive overclocking, but potentially, you know the drill, you can get much more out of things if you start tweaking, let's say, for the sake of argument, the memory timings or memory frequency, and so on and so on. And also the base frequency here is being listed at 3.6 GHz with a 3.75 GHz average with these results. And we have seen on Geekbench 4, you can obviously add .gb4 at the end of the result, and you get much more accurate clock frequency information. We've seen Threadripper there hit 4.3 GHz-ish, depending upon the load. So what we can't tell, of course, with the user Geekbench results is whether it's the same CPU that's being used across these different tests, whether it's some other version, some other platform, some other variant. AMD are definitely squeezing every last drop of flexibility they can out of the Zen 2 architecture, as well as, of course, the chiplet design, which allows them a great deal of flexibility when actually designing products. It's going to be fascinating to see exactly what the company release over the next 6 or so months. And next piece of news is Nvidia. I'm going to shock you with this one. You may actually need to sit down, as the company are preparing to launch a GTX 1650 Ti. apparently this card is going to launch in October. Unfortunately, we do not know the specifications of the GPU yet. Of course, it will be based on the Turing architecture, but aside from that, specification information is, well, non-existent. What we do know is that the card most likely will be at the lowest end of CUDA count of 1024, but potentially could be up to 1280. So we know that because the 1650, the vanilla 1650, has just 896 CUDA cores, so obviously they need to have more than 896, whereas the 1660 vanilla has just 1408, so obviously they don't want to match that, so most likely it's going to be the 1024 or 1280 mark. As for the pricing, well, Nvidia have a lot of flexibility here, because the 1650 is around 140, 150 US dollars MSRP, obviously depending on the variant that you buy, whereas the 1660 vanilla costs around the 220, 230 mark, once again depending upon the model that you buy. So I suspect that this is going to be slotting in right smack bang in the middle of that, around 180, 190 US dollars. Potentially this could be to face off AMD and the upcoming Navi 14 GPU. Although honestly, even if AMD were not releasing this, given that Nvidia have that kind of entry into the market, it's like a new price point and it's obviously going to attract consumers. Honestly, from my point of view, it's not a particularly exciting release, because as a reviewer you can just be like, well, I wonder how this is going to perform. But from the perspective of just having more potential options available to consumers, obviously that's a good thing, but it's probably not going to be anything to set the world on fire. Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and if you did, then the normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe, because that helps us out an absolute ton. And, well, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.